Soll irgendwo Bestimmtes stehen oder ist es egal? Okay. Wir gehen ein bisschen aus dem Bild. All right. I guess it's on. I mean, it's not on for the hall here, I think, but it's just for online. Okay, for that explanation for online. Welcome to a very spontaneous event. My name is Lukas Brunner. I'm a senior scientist here at the Department for Meteorology and Geophysics at the University of Vienna, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Katharine Hayhoe, who kindly agreed to give a very, very spontaneous talk today. I have known about you for quite a while from your work and also your social media presence, I guess. The first time I actually saw you in real life was in a very unlikely place in the Egyptian desert. That was last year at the UN Climate Conference, the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. And I also saw you giving a really great talk there, but unfortunately I did not have the chance to speak to you there either. So when I saw that you're in Vienna, I thought I have to reach out and try it. And that was actually only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. So this is why all of this is very spontaneous. So great that so many people showed up. Anyway, that's really a great thing. And I also really want to take this opportunity to thank all of the people that were involved in organizing this on such short notice. It was really great, so thanks a lot to the team from University of Vienna and also to you and your team that this was made possible. Thanks a lot. Katharine Hayhoe is a professor at the Department of Political Science, actually. We just chatted about this a little bit at the Texas Tech University. She has over 100 publications covering a range of topics, from high-resolution climate modeling to climate extremes, climate impacts. And she also does a lot of other things on the side, like climate communication. She's chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, an organization with over 1 million members, actually. I looked that up. It's really quite amazing, and obviously very, very active on social media. I mainly know you from your Twitter presence, but then I realized you're also more hip than me and also on some other apps that I don't even have, like Instagram. Sorry, yeah, I'm old. I don't know about TikTok.
I'm on TikTok.
Oh, you're on okay. I'm not even going there. And Blue Sky. I saw you on Blue Sky. Yes, I have switched over as well to the bright side of life, I guess. And I guess I could go on with this list for quite a while, but this is not why we are here. So I think without much further ado, I would actually hand over to you. And I'm very happy to give you the floor for your talk, How to Catalyze Change in a Warming World. So thanks a lot for coming, and the floor is yours.
There we go. I think you could still hear me anyways, right? Yeah. So I said, of course, because whenever I travel in person, I try to do as much as I can. I don't travel for single events. I only travel when I have enough events collected together. And so I've been here for a week, and I've been at Potsdam, Berlin. I went and I gave a talk at Czech Globe this morning. And now I'm here for this talk, for the conference tomorrow. I'm speaking at CEU tomorrow in the middle of the day also. So it's really great to be with you here, and I am going to be speaking, but first of all, I'm going to be asking you some questions. And when I say you, that includes people listening online. But it doesn't include people listening online if you're watching the recording. So if you're watching the recording, no luck. But if you're watching live or if you're here, I want to ask you a few questions. And so go ahead and take out your phone, or you can do this on your computer. If you want to do it on your computer, you have to type in pollev.com/Katharine. You have to spell Katharine with 2 A's. That's a lot easier in German. In English, people always use an E, but in German, it's 2 A's. Or just take a picture of the QR code. That's easier. And when you have done that, you will see the first question. Have you got it? There. Okay. The first question is, I want to know who you are. So tell me who you are. And I have to say, students are always the fastest at answering this question. So if you didn't get the QR code, you can see the QR code up in the top right corner. It's the same one. Or you can see the web address, pollev.com/Katharine. The web address is up there. Okay, so it looks like 80% are students. And then we have 9% listening online. Professors and researchers are 20. See, the professors and researchers, we're always slow. It always takes us twice as long to answer this question. All right. Oh, the listening online people, it took them a little bit to start, but now they're coming too. Good. Okay, so about just over half students, and then professors, researchers listening online, and some others. All right. Now, I have another question for you, and you have to answer this question with a word. Only one word. Any word, preferably in English if you want me to understand it, but only one word. In one word, describe what you study or work on. I want to know. What do you study or work on? Oh, communications was first. That person has the fastest fingers. Meteorology, atmosphere, clouds, climate, geoinformatics, mental health, the universe. Okay, that's valid. I think everything sort of falls under that. Unless you're studying parallel universes, in which case you would have an S on the end of universe. Meta-ethics, that's a good one. Circulation, mathematics, wood, sustainability, industry, climate journalism, data and communication. All right. See, this is why it had to be one word. Now, I would just like to say for everybody who answered universe, stars there, my undergraduate degree and my first 5 publications are in astronomy and physics. But I moved over to atmospheric science when I learned not only how urgent climate change was, but how unfair it was and how it was affecting people already today who couldn't do anything about it. So I always hoped that I would be able to go back to studying galaxies. I think it might be too late. I think if we fixed climate change tomorrow, I think, well, first of all, we would have the biggest party ever, right? And then second of all, I think I would open a local yarn shop. That would be my plan. Anyways, now, on to a more serious question, now that you know how this works. You have to answer this question with a word too, but this question is harder because it's not about what you are, but how you feel. When someone says, or when you see on your phone news about, or when I say climate change, how do you feel? How do you feel? When you see a new news report, or when you see a new study, or when you hear something? So the first time I asked this question was exactly 2 years ago. I had never asked anybody this. A few years ago, in the science area, we were starting to think about our feelings. Climate scientists were asked to write letters about how they felt. And I wasn't sure how I felt about writing a letter about how I felt. Because I certainly had feelings about it, but that was what started me thinking, well, how do I feel about this? And then I started asking other people. And I remember the first group of people I ever asked this question of was a group of mothers. It was at a children's museum, and I was speaking to a group of mothers. And so I thought, well, I'm a mother, they're mothers. I'll just ask them, how do you feel? And it's really interesting, actually. I wish I had a picture of their answers, because aside from the sweaty, I think it was exactly the same as yours. Really. Frustrated, worried, angry, sad, helpless, hopeless, and exhausted. And so after I asked the mothers at the Science Museum, then I was speaking to a group of architects, so I asked them. And then I was speaking to a group of physicians, so I asked them. Then I was speaking to a group of colleagues at the University of California, Berkeley, so I asked them. Then I was speaking to a group of Catholic nuns, so I asked them. And I can tell you, I have analyzed the data, because I'm a scientist, so that's what we do, we analyze the data, and there is no statistically significant difference between anyone's answers. In terms of if you code the answers as negative, neutral, or positive, it is all within the same range. It is all within the range of about 95 to 95% negative. So here's the first thing I want to say. If you feel this way, you are not alone. In fact, if you ask people, are you worried about climate change? This is what the world looks like. Now, the gray countries weren't surveyed. There's only one country that's blue, and the country that's blue, Yemen, has very, very large problems to worry about. So they're probably just not thinking about climate change because they're concerned that they'll be alive tomorrow or if they'll be able to feed their families this year. But aside from that, around the world, you can see everywhere is reddish or orangish. Can you see this okay? Should we turn off these lights at all to see the screen, or can you see the screen all right?
Turn off light.
Yeah, turn off the lights. Okay, how do we do that? I'll let them figure it out. So that's the first thing I want to say is if you feel this way, you are not alone. In fact, there are many people who feel this way, so many people that there are a lot of very good books on this. If you want to, now that you have your phones out, you're welcome to take pictures of anything that you want to remember. There's some really good books on how to deal with the anxiety, the fear, the frustration, the anger that comes. And I feel these things too. It's so funny because often on social media, I'm very relentless at the practice of hope. Practice is not an emotion. It's something that you have to practice very, very, very hard. And I don't get on social media a lot and tell people when I feel this way, but I do. I feel this way a lot. I feel this way when I hear that fossil fuel companies' subsidies increased last year, that they made record profits and they used those profits to cut their climate goals, that the UK opened up more area to offshore drilling, that in my home country of Canada, the province of Alberta that has the most oil and gas turns down money from the government to kickstart the clean energy industry. They just turn it down for no reason other than politics. These things are frustrating. And not only that, but when we look at the science, this is the second thing I want to say, feeling sad, angry, worried, depressed, frustrated, overwhelmed, feeling this way is a normal and rational response. Because what we see happening is the fact that we're conducting an unprecedented experiment with the only home we have. As far back as we can go in the paleoclimate history of this planet, we have never seen this much carbon going into the atmosphere this quickly. This is our home. And today we know that, according to the last IPCC report, temperature is rising faster than any time in our history. And why does this matter? It's because these burning fossil fuels and the impacts of burning fossil fuels, including all the wildfire smoke that we had this summer where I live, it affects the air that we breathe, and we can't live without air. It affects the water that we drink. It affects the food that we eat. It affects the buildings and the roads and the systems that we use. It affects the nature that surrounds us. This issue is not about saving the planet. The planet will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. The question is, will we be on it? That's the question. And so I don't call this saving the planet. I literally call this saving us. And I put a little star there on the us because I want to be clear, it's us humans and all the other living things that share this planet with us because we can't survive without them. They don't need us. We need them. Half the oxygen we breathe comes from phytoplankton in the ocean. Even your cat would be fine if humans died. Dogs, maybe not so much. So if you are concerned, you should be. This is a rational response to what's happening. So if anybody has ever told you, oh, don't be so worried, or why are you so sensitive, this is a completely logical response. They're the ones who don't understand how bad this is. So now I want to ask you a different question. And this question you can answer with as many words as you want. Not only that, but here's the fun part. You can upvote other people's answers. So I would love you to tell me, what are you most worried about when it comes to how climate change is going to affect us or you or here or the world or people? And then go ahead and vote up the answers that you most agree with. I want to see what rises to the top. There's no right answer. Everything you're going to put here is probably right. So conflict is rising to the top, and increased extreme weather events. And of course, increased extreme weather events also affect conflict because they lead to resource scarcity, they destroy people's homes. Migration is a huge one, tipping points, yep. It looks like, oh, no, it's moving around. Oh, see, it's a competition. Okay, so let's see. We've got a tie now. We've got heat waves in an unfair world are tied. We've got tipping points and increased weather events are tied. And then conflict is still up there at the top. Okay, so the reason why I asked you this question is because just yesterday, the Yale program on climate communication released a brand new survey. And in it, they asked people in the United States, what are you most worried about when it comes to climate change? Now, they weren't asking scientists. They were asking people in the general public. So that when they ask people in the general public, often they might not understand the links between climate change and conflict. But it turns out that the general public does understand something. Of this list, what do you think the general public most understands? Weather extremes. And I don't have the numbers for Austria, but on the way here, I took the train. And so I conducted a survey. The sample size is 1. I asked the man sitting beside me. And sure enough, he said, extreme weather events. Yeah. So this is the most obvious way that people are experiencing the impacts of climate change today, because our brains are built to remember weather. Our brains are not built to remember climate. Our brains, maybe yours can, mine can't. My brain can't add up the temperature, precipitation, humidity, wind speed, solar radiation on every day of the year for 20 years and then fit a trend line to it. I can't do that in my head. But I can definitely remember that ice storm, or that really hot day, or the fact that every day this summer was a really hot day, or the wildfire smoke, or the time the sky was orange. We can remember that. So as humans, we remember extreme weather events, and that's why I think it's at the top, number 1, is because that's something that we notice and we remember. In fact, some of you who might know me, you know that often I refer to climate change as global weirding. And the reason for that is because I was standing in line to pick up my son from class, and the man behind me asked me, and this was in Texas, he said, "Could I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure, we're standing in line. Why not?" And he said, "Do you feel like the weather has gotten weirder?" And this was a few years ago. I thought about it, and I said, yes, I think that's a great description. I said, the heat wave season is longer, heat waves are more extreme, heavy rainfall is more frequent, hurricanes are stronger. I do think it's getting weirder. And he said, I knew it. I've lived here for 30 years, and I knew that something was different. So this really resonates with people's lived experience. And the way I explain it to people is I say, wherever we live, it's as if we have a pair of weather dice. And we always have a chance of rolling a double 6 naturally. A double 6 is an extreme weather event, like a heat wave, a flood, a drought. But as the world gets warmer, decade by decade, it's replacing one of these numbers with another 6, and then another 6, and then even a 7. And so all of a sudden you're saying, how could this happen? We just had 3 500-year flood events in 3 years. That's climate change loading the weather dice against us. Now, at the global scale, this is from the Aon Benfield Weather and Climate Catastrophes report from last year. At the global scale, you can see the numbers go up and down. That's weather. But decade by decade by decade, they're ticking upwards. And if you look at just last year, some highlights from just last year, or some lowlights, I should say, $313 billion worth of damage. The 5th costliest year on record. 75% of the global insured losses were in the United States. So that's part of why you saw that answer there. Australia and South Africa had the costliest disasters, and there were 19,000 heat-related deaths in Europe. That number is likely undercounted. And it's true, when we look at the United States, this is what it looks like in the United States. This is the number of billion-plus dollar weather and climate disasters and how they've changed over time. Back in the 1980s, there was one every 4 months on average. By the 2010s, there was one every 3 weeks. This year, one every 2 weeks, and the year isn't finished. Not only that, but today, thanks to the science of attribution, we can put a number on how much worse climate change is making these events. Now, 10 years ago, every time there was a hurricane or a flood or a wildfire, a reporter would call me and they would say, "Is this climate change?" And I would give the standard scientific answer. We can't attribute any one event to human-caused climate change, but we know that over decadal timescales, the statistics of this event are changing. That was 10 years ago. Now, when they call me up, I say, just wait, because we will have a number for you very soon on exactly how much more likely climate change made this, or how much more area was burned by wildfires, or how much hotter the heat wave was, or how much more rain fell. This is the area of attribution, and if you're not familiar with it, there is a phenomenal book that I highly recommend to you by my colleague Freddie Otto. I love this because, let me give you the headline here. Deadly Heat, the Pleasantly Terrifying Dr. Freddie Otto talks about extreme climate events. This is an outstanding book on her field of research, but it's written in plain, I was going to say plain English, it's written in plain German, but then translated into English. I read the version in English. And in it, she explains how, as scientists, we can put numbers on just how much worse climate change made a given event. And then along came 2023, right? This year is outstanding in so many ways. Hottest summer on record, hottest year on record, biggest wildfire season in Canada. You know, the Canadian wildfires were only in the news when the smoke reached New York City. After the smoke didn't reach New York City anymore, because where the smoke goes depends on atmospheric circulation, they weren't in the news anymore. Had the wildfires stopped? No. 2 weeks ago, there was enough area burned in a single week to equal one regular season in Canada. That was 2 weeks ago, and there was not a single story about it. We're overloaded with these disasters, and you can see a theme here. I read a lot, so there's a lot of good books that I recommend. There's a lot of books that will tell you how bad it is. If you read the climate book, which is as big as a Bible, it's got a chapter on everything, every way that it will harm you. There's a book a number of years ago called The Uninhabitable Earth, great title. That book was so scary that I actually, in my book is called Saving Us. Now you know why. In my book, Saving Us, I actually have a whole section called The Uninhabitable Earth Effect, about how it scared people so badly that they were completely paralyzed and they couldn't do anything about climate change. David and I are friends, just to be clear. The Heat Will Kill You First just came out, and Jeff and I are collaborating on an art exhibit. I wrote an essay to go with art at a museum in Texas, and so we're going to be doing a panel together at this art museum after I get back. So disaster after disaster after disaster, and on social media, every day this summer, I saw someone saying this. I saw them saying this on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Threads, on Blue Sky. What am I missing? Not Spoutable. I'm not on Spoutable. Everywhere I was on social media, I saw people saying this. If the Hawaii wildfires doesn't work, nothing will. If the Canadian wildfires, if the Greece wildfires, if the Canary Islands wildfires, if the heat wave in Spain, if the heat wave in Texas, if this doesn't work, nothing will work. Did it work? No, it didn't. But I think I know why. And that's what I want to talk about today. So we usually think that the world looks like this. Me and everyone I know, including everyone in this room and everyone listening online, we're worried, right? But everybody else, they're not worried. They don't want to talk about it. So if this is true, what do we have to do? We want to make them worried, right? So how do you make people worried? Well, there's a very good way to make people worried. You just tell them the truth. So this is a little cartoon from my Global Weirding series. If they just knew the facts, they'd change their minds, right? So climate changes, and we're worried. So what do? We load up our wheelbarrow with all of the factual, scary information about how climate change is affecting the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the places we love, our lives. But what happens? This is what I saw happening this summer. People tune out. They tune out even more, and inaction results. So a few years ago, when I was writing my book, Saving Us, I did the traditional academic thing, which is I read 80 other books first, because I was always convinced someone else had already said everything. And it wasn't until I had read all the books that I realized, no, I actually had some ideas that nobody else had said. So I read a lot of books, and one of the best books I read was by a neuroscientist. It was called The Influential Mind. And in this book, she didn't talk about climate change at all. I mean, I think maybe she mentioned those words once, sort of like a throwaway example most of the way through the book. But she had so many things she said that made total sense to me. And here's one of the things that she said in this book. Her name is Tali Sharot. She's based in the UK. And she said, fear and anxiety will cause us, humans, to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. That was like a light bulb went off in my head. Our brains are not wired to respond to fearful information long term. Our brains are wired to respond to fearful information by running away from the bear. Or as they teach you in Canada, you just have to run faster than the person beside you. That's what our brains are wired to do. Our brains are not wired for an ultra marathon for 30 years to run away from an apocalyptic future. But here's the thing. When we look at the polling data, this is not the way that the world is. It's not the way we are here in Austria. It's not the way we are in the United States or Canada. It's not the way people are in the UK. It turns out that this is the way people are. There's a small group who claim they're not worried, about 25% of the population in Germany and most other European countries, and I think they're just sort of lying to themselves to feel better, most of them. And there's only a small group that's activated. So in the United States, I don't have the activated numbers for Europe because they haven't done this type of study yet. I've looked and I haven't found it. But in the US, they found that over 70% of people were worried. 8% were activated. 8. So what is our goal? Is our goal for the whole world to be worried but paralyzed? Or is our goal for enough people to be activated to change the world? The second, right? So if it's the second, then clearly moving more yellow people into the blue group isn't going to fix the problem. And that was when, again, the light bulb went off for me. So what are the barriers then? If people are already worried, what are the barriers? Well, it turns out that there are two really big barriers. We don't understand why it matters. We have all this information in our head, but we have to connect it to our heart. And then we don't know what to do about it. We have to connect our heart to our hands. The first one here is called psychological distance, and it's something that we are all prone to. This is just something that humans have as a defense mechanism. We think of risks as being far away from us in time or space, abstract rather than concrete, and irrelevant to our primary concerns, and I'll prove this to you. According to research, we should stand up and move around at least once every 30 minutes. Who here does that every day? Anybody? I'll be honest, I actually have a watch that tells me to do it, and I still don't do it. I do it more than I used to, but it's not every 30 seconds. Now, do you think that research was sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies? Do you not trust the people who did that research? Do you think it's invalid? Chances are you probably trust it. You probably believe it. I mean, I don't see why not. But we see the risks as being distant in time. Oh, I'll worry about that when I'm getting a little bit older, when I can't get up so easily. That's when I'll do that. So we all do this. And so what I want to do is I want to show you, using data, that when it comes to climate change, all 4 of these types of psychological distance are in play. And I'm going to start with data from the United States because that's where the most detailed data is available. But humans are humans. And honestly, wherever I go, I hear people say the exact same things. So then I'm going to show you the global data. It just doesn't have as much resolution, but you can see Austria on it. Okay, so you ask people in the United States, is global warming happening? And people say yes. All these little shapes here are the counties, and anything more than 50% is orange. Then they ask people, do you think it will harm plants and animals? Where's the psychological distance here? in terms of relevance, non-human species. So sure, yeah, plants and animals, no problem. What about people in the future? Yes, sure, people in the future. What about people who live over there, not here? Yeah, sure, it'll affect them. And then they asked, will it affect you? Yes. Now, again, this is not unique to people who live in the US. This is human, and I will show you that. Here we have, are you worried about climate change, right? And then next we have, will it affect future generations? And then we have, do you think it will affect you? Isn't that unreal? Like, if you don't think it's going to affect you, who do you think it's going to affect? Like, do you literally think that your neighbor's house will flood and your house will not flood? Do you think you walk around in a bubble that is 5 degrees Celsius cooler on a hot day than your neighbor? No. Yet somehow we have this incredible psychological distance, as you can see. And what's amazing is that you look at the countries that are most worried, and then you look at the countries that don't think it will affect them, right? So the first thing I learned is that we have to talk about the fact that it's changing here where we live. It's affecting us now. It's not global average temperature, it's the fact that it was, 25 degrees last week, here in October. And it's relevant to me. But then the second part, this one's even more important, because most people want solutions that give us a better life and a better world. And most of the solutions, not all, but most of them are described in negative terms, right? You can't do this, you can't go there, you can't have that, you can't eat that. And unfortunately, another thing I've learned about human psychology is we are more afraid of losing what we have than we are excited about gaining something new. So when all the solutions are expressed in terms of you will lose that, you won't have this, nobody wants to do it. And I will tell you something. The people who don't want us to change, they know this. They know this. They have read all the PR manuals, all the psychological analysis manuals. And so what do you see them doing? And this is so clear in the United States, but it's happening in the EU also. You see politicians who don't want people to act saying, oh, they want to take away your meat. I actually saw somebody sent me a picture of a sign that said, Bernie Sanders, do you know who Bernie Sanders is? Yeah, he's that, yes. Politician from the US, short, white hair, mittens. There was a sign spray painted on a building that says, Bernie Sanders doesn't want you to have children. He's going to, for abortion is the only solution to climate change. And I thought that couldn't possibly be true. And then I went and I spoke at a Christian university. And the first thing they said was, well, I don't know if we can allow you to speak because you're just going to tell people abortion is the only solution to climate change. And I was like, really? You actually believe that? But why do they believe it? Because very smart people have thought, what do people love so much? Let's tell them that climate solutions mean taking away the thing they love most. And so it's like people have a teddy bear that they're hugging, and very clever people are like, oh, I see your teddy bear. Those environmentalists and those climate activists are going to take away your teddy bear. And then, of course, they don't support climate solutions. But there's another issue, too, which is even if we do support climate solutions, we don't think anything we do will make a difference. And this word is called efficacy. Efficacy means if I do something, do I think it will make a difference? And most people's answer to this is no. Most people do not think what they do can make a difference. And I know some of you think that because I saw the answer up there. So if you don't think what you can do will make a difference, what's the most logical thing for you to do? Nothing. Exactly. Thank you. If it wasn't going to make a difference, I wouldn't do it either. I don't like banging my head against a brick wall. So how do we tackle psychological distance, and how do we build efficacy? It turns out that there is something so simple that we aren't doing. It's so simple that we just skip right over it. We don't even think of it. We don't notice it. It's so simple that it sounds like it would be useless, but in fact, I think it's probably the most powerful thing that we can do. And where I found this thing was on the maps. So this is where we left off. Is global warming going to harm you personally? And people said no. But there was one map that was darker blue. And the map that was darker blue showed me what it is we're not doing that we need to be doing. Do you ever talk about it? No. Now, let me show you the global data. Here's the people who are worried again. Do you ever talk about it? Now, there's a few interesting things here. In low-income countries, people's awareness of climate risks is highly correlated with education. And so education in the countries that are most affected by climate change would significantly increase the conversations. The second interesting thing is that if you look up to Sweden, I think you can see the impact of a single human being. Right? And it's spreading. So if anybody says, what difference can one person make? A single human being used a piece of white cardboard and her voice. That's it, nothing else. Okay, a black marker. A black marker, white cardboard, and her voice, and I think you can actually see her impact on a map. That's pretty stunning. What does talking change? And when I say talking, I mean, sometimes you might be sharing on social media, or you might be writing, or you might be actually having a conversation, or you might be talking by voting, or you might be talking by where you put your money, or talking with what you do or you don't buy, or where you do or you don't live, or how you do or you don't commute. What does talking change? It changes who we see ourselves as. It changes what people around us think. It changes our social norms, which are our societal perspective on what is or is not acceptable. Like right now, it's not acceptable if I was standing up here with a big plastic water bottle, right? So that societal norms have changed. It changes our sense of efficacy, and it changes our ability and willingness to act. Because this is pretty simple. If you don't talk about it, why would you care? And if you don't care, why would you do anything about it, right? Sarah Peach is an environmental journalist, and I like how she puts it, so I want to just share this quote with you. She says, "Talk is the fertile field in which cultural change begins." So is talking enough? No, of course not. But is it critical to begin? Yes. How do people work together? In its absence, it's impossible for a group of people to solve a problem. And she went on and said, the goal of the conversation is not to tell people about it, it's to expand the number of people in the conversation. So if climate's changing and we're worried, how do we have those types of conversations? What do we do next? We have all this information in our head, but we need to connect it to our hearts and our hands. So if you share information on how climate change is affecting the things we care about, the people we care about, the places we care about, and what solutions look like that we can be involved in, then people feel empowered. And that's when change results, and that's because our brains are wired this way. Going back to the neuroscience, here's what Tally says. She says, the human brain is built to associate forward action. Remember, we're running an ultra marathon here. Forward action with a reward, not with avoiding harm. In an ultra marathon, are they running towards the finish line to win, or are they running to try to escape the bear? They're running to win, right, at the end. That's the way we function as humans. So, and this is amazing, I promise you she wasn't talking about climate change. But of course she was too, right? So reframe your message so the information you provide induces hope, not dread. Isn't that amazing? So, okay, you might say, no, give me some specifics. All right, so I will give you some specifics. A couple of years ago, I was talking about this, and I was in Iowa. And I was talking about how we need to talk about how climate change affects us and what we can do to fix it. So someone said, all right, that's fine, but I still really want to know, how do I tell people about the polar bears where I live? And the problem is, I mean, I love polar bears. I know someone here does too, because I saw that answer. But most people have never seen a polar bear in the wild. And if the only reason that we're taking climate action is for the polar bears, it is a lot cheaper to just breed animals to feed the polar bears and then just live our life. Because the problem is the polar bears are starving because they hunt their prey on the ice, they don't eat on land, they just sort of forage. But if you really just had to feed polar bear populations and that was the only thing you had to do to adapt to climate change, I think we could do it. So my answer was, I don't think you do if you live in the central United States. When I live in Texas, I talk about cotton. I talk about the cotton flower that you can see me holding, I talk about the cotton plants, and I talk to the cotton farmer. Jack. My colleague Jo Ellen is an oceanographer. And of course, this year we had incredible marine heat waves, but she lives in Arizona, and Arizona does not have a coastline. So what does Jo Ellen talk about? She talks about the fact that the summers in Arizona are so hot now that she has to wake up her children before dawn because the only time they can play outside is before dawn. That's what she talks about. I was in New York for Climate Week, and the next week after, it flooded. There was water coming out of the subway walls. There was water flooding people's basement apartments. So I was talking about the flooding. We can talk about the changes that we see in nature around us. We can talk about the changes that we see in our snowpack in the mountains. We talk about whatever people already care about. And if you don't know what they care about, ask them what they care about first, rather than making assumptions. And they don't have to care for the same reason we do. So that's the first half. What about the second half? Well, there, even the science offers some hope. I love these conclusions from the IPCC. Every action matters. Every bit of warming matters. Every year matters. Every choice matters. I go to places like Project Drawdown, and I read all the articles they have at Project Drawdown on all the different solutions. I love reading about how climate solutions can also clean up our air. Almost 10 million people die from breathing in air pollution from burning fossil fuels every year. I love telling people how climate solutions like restoring coastal wetlands and greening urban neighborhoods will protect us from disasters, help us grow more food. I love telling people how solar energy is the cheapest form of electricity humans have ever had, how we can reduce inequalities through climate solutions, how we can make cities safer, how we can have a more stable world. Who doesn't want that? If you go to my social media profiles, wherever I can pin something, I pin something. And the thing I pin is this. If you're worried about climate change and you want to make a difference, here is what you can do. Now, all of these look like different ideas, but they're actually almost the same idea, right? Number one, talk about it. Number two, join a climate action group and talk about it. Number three, consider where you keep your money, talk with your money, your bank, your credit card, your retirement. Number four, spark ideas for change at work and school by talking about it. Number five, hold politicians accountable by voting and advocating and talking about it. Did you hear that in the Netherlands, they've been protesting since they heard that the fossil fuel subsidies had increased last year? And the Dutch government has a huge investment in fossil fuel subsidies. And so every week at the same time, in the same place, first of all, it was maybe 10, then 100, then 1,000, then tens of thousands of people every week protesting the fossil fuel subsidies. The government finally agreed this week that they're going to set up a committee to look at phasing them out. That's the power of people's voices. And of course, make personal changes, but don't just make them contagious by talking about them. I love what Bill McKibben says. He's a wonderful author, if you haven't read him yet, on environmental issues. He says, the most important thing an individual can do right now is not be such an individual. Isn't that interesting? He means that when we work together, that's how we can affect change. So I have a newsletter every week called Talking Climate, where I share good news, not so good news, and something people can do. And what type of news do I share? I share news about things that people care about. Oh, I'll pause for a second. Yes, you can find it there. Like what? Well, something that people care about is beer. And in fact, I was just at Czech Globe this morning, and one of the faculty members there said, yes, he said, I've published, hundreds of studies, but the one that got the most interest was the one I did last year on beer. That was the one everybody wanted to talk about. So in my newsletter, I talk about football. I talk about kids and parents. I talk about things that we care about, and I share information. Like young Austrians say the climate impact of their employer is an important factor when job hunting. Or this city is on a journey to carbon neutrality. Or Austria has a target of 100% renewable energy by 2030, and it's already a global leader. But of course, there's more to go. When we share this information, we start to see that this giant boulder of climate action is not sitting at the top of an impossibly steep cliff with only one or two hands on it. When we realize that countries are acting, when we realize that communities are acting, when we realize, of course, that young people are speaking out, when we realize that our own lives are changing, we realize that giant boulder, oh, and I should say the world is changing too, very quickly. The giant boulder is at the top of the hill, but it's rolling down the hill in the right direction, and it's got millions of hands on it. And this is a completely different picture than how we normally picture it, which is if I added my hand and pushed, it wouldn't move. It is already moving, and if a boulder is already moving and you add your hand, it will go faster. So what do we need to make a difference? We need to have an idea that maybe something we do could matter. And that's something that I call hope. Hope recognizes the risk, understands what's at stake, starts by realizing it's really, really bad. You don't need hope when things are good. You need hope when things are bad. So you have to start by recognizing it's bad, but there's a path to a better future, and there's a way to get there. And I love this because this ties right in with what Greta says. She says, the one thing we need more than hope is action. Once we start to act, hope is everywhere. And so the way I think of it is this. Which comes first? It's a circle. It's a positive feedback loop, a true positive feedback loop. And I want to close with these thoughts. When the last IPCC report came out, I was asked to write an essay on the dire news in that report and how to respond. And so I read it and I thought about it. And this is what I realized. I realized that society has changed before. It's changed in enormous ways before. I realized that when it did, it was not because a president, a prime minister, a CEO, or a big, rich, wealthy, famous person decided it had to. So how did women get the vote? Did the president just wake up one morning and say, oh, it's Saturday, I think you should get the vote? No, that is not how it happened. How did apartheid end? How were civil rights enacted in the United States? Who were people like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and all the other people who shared and supported and fought for their visions of a better world? They were people who had the courage of their convictions, number one. And then what did they do? They used their voices to advocate for the systemic societal changes needed. And so what I realized was that we are the people who changed the world before. Not the presidents, not the prime ministers, not the CEOs. We are the people. And because we did it before, I'm pretty sure we can do it again. So when I realized that, I felt like the only question I have left is, what are we waiting for? I really think we can. Thank you. I love this. So before you ask me questions, I want to ask you one last question. Ready? Take out your phones again or your computer. When I say climate change now, I want to know how you feel. Oh, shoot. It's the wrong one. Dang it. Just a second here. This is the good thing about having your own computer, right? I want it, so hold what you were going to say, okay? Hold it, and let me activate the right one here. There we go. Is it this one? Yes, it's this one. Okay, now do it. Ooh, I like that. Let me say this. If you still feel anxious, I'm with you. I feel anxious a fair amount of the time. If you still feel frustrated, I'm frustrated too. In fact, I mean, my husband can tell you, I'm so frustrated, sometimes I just go around the house screaming because I'm so frustrated. And he just sort of, pats my shoulder and gives me a drink. But if we can feel motivated, empowered, encouraged, this is what we need to enter the positive feedback loop. The positive feedback loop is that action breeds hope and hope breeds action. And what we can do is we can bring other people into that feedback loop with us. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here and I'm going to open it up for questions. And you know how to do this. You can put in any question you want using as many words as you want. But there we go. Stay here for just another 8 or 9 minutes. So we started a few minutes late, so we'll just go a few minutes past quarter after. If someone has to leave, that's totally fine. So go ahead and put in your questions and then look at the other questions people have and upvote them. Is it showing questions? Or not? No, not yet? Come on. Oh, is it still showing the answers? Maybe I have to unactivate it. That's probably what it is. No, it says it's unactivated. Okay. Oh, it was? It's working? Okay. Here, I'll go here. Yeah, it says it's activated. There. Okay. There. Perfect. Ooh, this is a great question. All right. So it's already up there, so I'm just going to go ahead and answer the first question. So many times people think of climate change as a new issue. And when I talk to people who already have a lot on their plate, they might say, well, I'm working on global poverty, or I'm working on education, or I'm working on gender equity or racism, or I'm just a parent and I'm really busy. I just can barely keep my head above water. I don't have time for anything else. Or, I'm really, I care about my business, or I care about something else. People think climate change is a separate bucket. And so I already have all of these buckets that I'm putting my time and my energy into, my family, my job, the things I care about. And then here's another bucket, and I don't have any time or money or effort left to put in the extra bucket. That's where this question comes from. And so often people say, all right, we have to take the bucket of climate change and we have to push it up the ladder. Maybe it's number 28, we need to get it up to number 7, and then we have to get it up to number 3, and then we have to, you know what? Climate change is not a separate bucket. Climate change is the whole in every other bucket. Anything you care about, anything you are spending time on, effort on, climate change has gotten to the point where it's probably affecting it. Your family, the place you live, the bottom line for a business, the security of a university in the future. I was speaking to university presidents last year, and they asked me what I wanted them to do. And I said, I want you to teach every student about why climate change matters to them, the heart, and what they can do to fix it, the hands. If they're an engineer, a lawyer, in medical school, business, the arts, we need everybody. And they said, why should we do that? And I said, I thought about my answer first, and I thought, should I say this? And then I decided, yes, I'm just going to say it. I said, because I don't think we'll have universities in 100 years if we don't fix it. And the whole group was like, oh, because of course, these are some very old universities, right? But I don't think that we will have higher education as we know it if we don't fix climate change. So it isn't a case of trying to move it up people's priority. It's a case of finding out what their priority already is, and then showing them how climate change is the whole in that bucket. Great first question. All right. Now, this one's challenging because sometimes, so another thing I'll say, this question I hear everywhere. So it's not just in Austria, it's everywhere. Everybody has the same perspective. And people say, well, oops, politicians went down. I'm answering the politicians one. Politicians, this may be surprising, but politicians are humans too. A special kind, but they are humans. So how do we have these positive, constructive conversations? We have to start with what they care about. So with politicians, because they have so many people asking them things all the time, it's even more important to do your research and figure out what they already care about, and show them how the whole in climate change is the whole in their bucket, but also to tell them what real solutions look like, because often politicians will say, well, what am I supposed to do? We need to be telling them this is what you could do, and using our voices through voting, but not only through voting, but through talking to them. Fortunately, Canada is a small country, a little bit bigger than Austria, population-wise, obviously a lot bigger size-wise. And so we actually get the chance to talk to our politicians a lot more than people who live in the United States. I was at my parents' house this summer, and there was a knock on the door, and it was our member of parliament. So I had a conversation with him on the doorstep about how we needed to be doing more about climate change. And he was really good. He said exactly what. He said, I need to know what. I'm happy to say we need to do more, but I need to know what. And it was a good challenge. What did I want him to do? So it's not easy, but I think it's really, really important because they are multipliers, like this question said. Okay, how do I talk about, oh, this is a good one too. I heard a variation of this one last week. The variation was, I'm always boring people. You know, people just get bored. Well, that's because you're not talking about what they care about. People can talk about what they care about forever. Have you ever talked to somebody who loves fishing? I have. How about hiking? I'm actually more interested in that conversation. Oh yeah, I could go through all your favorite trails and hear all your stories. Skiing, absolutely. Children, oh yes, we can go through all of the years and talk about the difficulties of each year. So if you're passionate about something, and probably for some of you, like we talked about beer. So if somebody's passionate about something, they're not gonna get bored about it. So this is what I try to do with my newsletters. I try to give people information every week on something they might be interested in. And so a couple of months ago, or no, 2 months ago, I did a newsletter on sports. I did tennis, football, American football, golf, running. And then I saw someone on Twitter who was running a Twitter account called Fossil Free Football. And in it, he was highlighting all the teams that are taking action, and there's a lot of teams that are taking action. He was highlighting what fans can do. He was highlighting how people are being affected and athletes are being affected. And so I wrote him, I said, what you're doing is amazing. It's perfect. It's exactly what I wish people would do. And he said, oh, I read your book. And that's how he thought of it. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. So how do you talk about it when people don't want to hear it anymore? It's because you're not talking about what they're interested in. So find out what they're interested in, then do some research on Google. And yes, there's legitimate research out there to find out how climate change is affecting what they're interested in, including fishing. And then you're ready for the conversation. But don't forget to bring in positive solutions also. Okay, organizations. Oh, this one's an interesting one. There's a few different ways to get organizations to act. Number one, by taking a job with them and then advocating within your job. In fact, there's a program called Climate Voices that is all about helping employees advocate for climate action within their job. And it's run by a man named Bill Wheel, who has actually lost his voice due to a degenerative disease. He literally can't speak, but he is empowering people to use their voices in their companies. I just think that is absolutely phenomenal. So see, even if you can't speak, he is still doing it. So number one, take a job with them. Now, if you take a job with Exxon, that might not work, but with a lot of other companies, it would, or it could. Number two, don't invest in them and encourage other organizations you're part of, like universities that have endowments or other organizations, pension funds, encourage them not to invest. Number three, there's some people who actually invest on purpose. They actually get together and they buy up stocks of a company so they can attend the meeting if it's a public company and force them to adopt a climate resolution. Number four, don't buy their product. Number five, protest, advocate. People who chain themselves to the doors of banks that are funding fossil fuels. People who are protesting fossil fuel companies and energy companies. So how many ways was that? Take a job with them, or actually, there's one more. Get interviewed and then tell them you don't want the job because you don't want to work for them. Because 76% of Austrian youth, that is actually extremely impactful. Being told by their bright young employees that they don't want to work for them is actually very impactful on a business. So take a job, don't take a job, divest and encourage others to divest, invest as an activist, it's called activist investing, protesting, and not buying their products. That's 6 different ways. All right. So I think I answered that question. My answer is, if you can't change it, then I think you should quit. If you have really tried and you just can't do it, I think you should. But check out Climate Voices first, because it's got a lot of great tips. And there's also a European program called Climate Fresk. Have you heard of that? F-R-E-S-K. Climate Fresk is also very similar. And there's a couple of other programs too. Check out some programs, because you don't have to do it alone. There are organizations that exist to help you do this. And there's another organization called TerraDo, T-E-R-R-A Do, and it's all about training people to be advocates also within their industry. So to answer this question, first of all, if you're feeling discouraged, find a group that specializes in this, number one. Join the group and see if you can learn, see if you can make a difference, and if you can't make a difference after that, then find something else. Okay, so I think this is probably the best question to end on, don't you think? The most hopeful change that I've seen. The most hopeful, well, first of all, when you start to look for hope, it's all around you. But you have to look for it. It's not going to find you. You have to practice it. You have to, if you're practicing, if you're training for a race, it's hard, and you have to put a lot of effort into it. You have to put a lot of effort into hope. Hope is not easy. But when you start to look, you find hope. And so I found hope in the man who was running the fossil-free football account. I find hope in the fact that last Christmas, or the Christmas before, because I write about this in my book, I was invited to speak to the women's group in West Texas, where I live. And so I showed up at this women's group, and it was like 70 women in a very conservative area of Texas in a room. And the woman who was hosting it loved nutcrackers. You know the wooden nutcrackers? You do know the wooden nutcrackers. Her house was covered in them. Like, I'm talking covered. Like, I've never seen so many in my life. You couldn't even sit down. There's just nutcrackers everywhere. It was crazy. So I was going to talk to these women. So it was like, there was this huge Christmas tree beside me, and I was sort of like this on the Christmas tree, and then there was nutcrackers here. And I had to talk to them about climate change. And so what I did was I went around and I asked them to share stories of crazy weather that they had experienced. And in West Texas, everyone's experienced crazy weather. And then I said, do you feel like it's changing? And most people said, yes, I do feel like it's changing. And then I said, do you know that here in West Texas, in the most conservative part of the United States, I didn't say that part, just the first part. Do you know that we have one of the biggest solutions to climate change? We have more wind energy and more sun energy than we can use. In fact, if you took 100 by 100 square miles in West Texas, which in West Texas is like 4 cotton farms, they're huge, that would be enough electricity to supply the whole US if you cover it in solar panels and wind turbines. And that made them proud to be who they were. And then this woman spoke up. She was she was probably late 80s. She was very tall and very thin, and she had beautiful white hair. She spoke up and she said, that's right. She said, we've owned our land for, probably 200 years, and we've always wanted to be good stewards of our land, and that's why we're getting wind turbines. Me and my neighbor Maddie are taking our sandwiches and our folding stools, and we're going to go out and sit there next week and watch them put the wind turbines up. And I thought, if that could happen in Texas, it could happen anywhere. The world could truly change. And so ironically, living in Texas gives me hope, because when I see change in Texas, I feel like it could happen anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this, I guess, inspiring message of hope, you could say. I have a small present here for you, just a little thing. It's bee honey, and there's a story to it. So we have our weather station here at the Institute, and the weather station is, as it should be, surrounded by a small garden. And there's the people from the educational science department that are taking care of some bees there. And so this is the honey from these bees, and I hope you'll think of us when you enjoy this.
I will, and the honey is called Bee Smart. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Bye.